I call the member for Hunter.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I must say the member for Mallee, who I consider a good friend and a great champion of rural Australia, is living in a different world than the one I see. This idea that the measures in this bill are somehow in stark contrast to what Labor does in government, or indeed what the Labor Party did when last in government, is just a ridiculous proposition. Because this is a government without its own economic narrative. We know that. That is an uncontestable proposition. And while Labor welcomes all the measures taken in this bill, and we made it very clear from budget night we would be supporting the bills, many of the measures, if not most of the measures, are a reinstatement of the tax measures, tax breaks Labor put in place in government, which this government repealed as one of its first acts as a new government. So for the member for Mallee to suggest that this bill highlights the contrast between the two major political parties is just simply a ridiculous proposition. As I said, Mr Deputy Speaker, this is a government without an economic narrative. It has no economic reform program of any merit or of any substantial weight. Cutting funding to those least able to afford to have their income cut or their government support in their community organisation cut does not fall under the definition of economic reform. It certainly does not fall under the definition of structural reform. It has no idea about fiscal policy, social policy, and it certainly doesn't have any idea about agriculture policy and how fortuitous it is to have the minister at the table as I speak. But it gets worse than that, Mr Deputy Speaker, because this government talks about small business as if it's homogenous, as if each and every one of our small business people or organisations or entities is the same. And we all know that, in fact, that could not be further from the truth. Our small business sector is very, very diverse, larger and smaller, those motivated to grow, those not motivated to grow, those motivated to increase revenues, those who are not, those motivated to employ more, those not so motivated to employ more. They are in retail, in wholesale, in manufacturing, in IT, in the services sector, in entertainment, in farming, in trades. The list, of course, goes on and on and on. And, of course, the motivations vary considerably. As I said, some want to grow, some don't. Some want to employ more staff, many don't, because of all the complexity and responsibility, regulation, red tape, burden that comes with such a proposition. Some want to innovate and some don't. Some are effectively just buying themselves a job. That's the truth of it. Many tradies are a perfect example. Many truck drivers provide another example. Buying themselves a job, either by necessity or motivated to do so, and are happy with a reasonable income stream and maybe to work 5 days a week rather than 7. Many, of course, do work 7, but many do not. So we're dealing with a very diverse range of people and business entities. And this is well acknowledged and understood by those in academia who follow small business policy and indeed promote small business policy. And I'm very grateful to one of them, and he's a very good friend of mine, Professor Scott Holmes, who's the Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of Western Sydney. He's relying on extensive survey data. He's actually broken them down into 5 groups, and it's interesting because those groups aren't only very different in their makeup, in their motivations, and their profit ambitions, etc., but they also see themselves as affected or challenged by different areas of government policy. So his first segment is a group he calls financially constrained growth aspirers. He said these are younger businesses, mostly seeking growth, but struggling to achieve it, with 2/3 of them feeling they're not performing to their expectations. The second group is a group he describes as externally impacted growth seekers. He says they're mature businesses mostly seeking growth and, like segment 1, struggle to achieve it, with something like 65% of them performing worse than they'd hoped over the past 12 months. The third group is a group he describes as broadly impacted stability seekers. These are businesses with lesser growth aspirations and yet only moderately satisfied with their performance, with almost half reporting their businesses perform under their expectations. The fourth is the stress-free stability seekers, a well-established group, he says, and there seems to be no area that really impacts upon them in terms of their business ambitions. They're, of course, the group we like most, Mr Deputy Speaker. They don't have any trouble with government, apparently, but there is good reason for this, of course, and I'll return to that. The fifth group is the technology-oriented growth achievers. These businesses tend to be relatively large and involved in the production of technology-related products and services. Most of these growth-oriented businesses are successful in achieving their goals, with a fair or higher proportion performing better than expected in their minds and in their assessment of their own business. Now, one of the key points about all this, of course, is that, as I said, they see government putting up different sorts of challenges for them. And by the way, the same survey works demonstrates that the key issues across all groups are first of all, economic uncertainty. And I think I could spend some time talking about the economic uncertainty this government has created over the last 20 months by constantly talking down the economy and its fear-mongering campaign on debt, deficit, etc. So economic certainty, followed by the maintenance of and growing revenues at second. Third, managing cash flows, costs and overheads. Next is competition, and next is red tape, taxation and compliance. Now, this goes to the point about the mantra surrounding this bill, because the Prime Minister would have you believe that despite the diversity of the small business sector, that what is contained within this bill, or these bills, is the panacea for all their ills, that the world is now the oyster for small business because of these tax measures, when the reality is, I remind the House, that much of them are a reintroduction of what Labor had done in government. But while they are still welcome, it's a welcome thing that the government's had a rethink. It does strongly, the mantra from the government strongly implies that they see this as the end of the road for government, that the government's now done its work and small business can sail off happily now because of all these wonderful things the government has done within these bills. Now, the thing about Scott Holmes's work is that of those 5 segments I spoke about, various government roles and responsibilities provide different weights on their businesses, depending on which segment they fall into. For example, segment 1, the financially constrained growth aspirers, mainly concerned about maintaining and growing revenues, managing cash flows, costs and overheads, access to finance. But when you get to segment 2, for them it's all about economic uncertainty and competition. I suspect that's competition amongst businesses and perceptions about market power amongst some of their competitors. In segment 3, it's all about red tape, taxation and managing cash flows. You would expect that this bill would be most welcomed by the 17% of small entities that fall into segment 3. In segment 4, more than 70% are satisfied with their business's ability to meet their goals, and they're not really concerned at all about government intervention or the way in which government policy impacts upon them. Segment 5, the technology-oriented growth achievers, are concerned most about technology changes and competition. So you can see the diversity both in the makeup of the entities, the nature of the entities, and what areas of government policy concern them most. The point I'm making here is that small business policy can't end at some taxation changes, as welcome as they might be. And this government, just like its broader economic narrative, has no story to tell about where it aspires to take our country's small entrepreneurs into the future. Now, there are also, of course, some agriculture initiatives in this bill, and I welcome them. Tax breaks generally of varying kinds, particularly in the area of depreciation. The big criticism I had on budget night, of course, which has now been repaired by a very significant backdown by the minister at the table, was this idea that farmers who had been in drought for 3 years weren't worthy for a new depreciation schedule, a tax break, until sometime after July 1, 2017. Well, that would have been a great load of help to farmers in drought, Mr Deputy Speaker. In fact, it would have been no help at all, so I welcome the back down and the fact that that tax measure, that tax break will come earlier. But it's a good initiative to give accelerated depreciation schedules to farmers facing drought, farmers who have some need for investment in feed storage, for example, water initiatives, all good things. Fencing, one of the biggest challenges facing many of our people on the land is wild dogs. Fencing, for many reasons, of course, is a good thing, so, and we welcome them. Of course, it's got to be seen in the context of some of the lesser achievements in agriculture. The FAGS cuts grants won't help people in rural communities very much. $1 billion out of councils, money that could have been spent on local initiatives to stimulate drought-affected economies. The drought policy has been an absolute failure. The minister's borrowing at just over 2% and lending it between 3 and 4. He still can't spend the money though, and that's why he keeps re-announcing his drought money, because farmers just either aren't taking up the measure, their support, because they don't see in their circumstances it will help, or they're not eligible for the assistance. And I urge the minister again to take another look at the failings of that policy. The opposition stands ready to support any change in direction that would help. I thought his rebate on water initiatives was a worthy initiative, and I'd welcome the transfer of some of that loans money that he can't spend into that initiative to provide more support. The other big thing, of course, I would describe it as a clanger, is the minister's decision to force the APVMA out of Canberra. This is an organisation not funded by government. It's an organisation which works on a fee-for-service basis. Its money comes from the companies it serves, companies that aren't based in Armidale in the minister's electorate, Mr Deputy Speaker. Companies are typically based in a couple of cities, including Canberra. This is going to be a catastrophe for the APVMA and the agriculture sector, and I call upon the minister to have a rethink. Of course, he's doing the same thing with our research and development corporations. Of course, he promised to spend more money on R&D. He's done nothing but cut it. Well, sorry, not nothing but cut it. He has put some extra money in, but he's taken more out than he's put in. So a clear breach of his election promise. But now he's forcing them to move. The GRDC to Wagga Wagga, the Fisheries RDC to Hobart, Rural Industries RDC to Albury-Wodonga, and of course the APVMA to Armidale. He'd already cut the Riddick funding, by the way, worth noting. Now, Minister, I appeal to you. You know that all of these organisations are distraught over this measure. They believe it's going to have a significant adverse impact on the commodity sectors they serve. You know, Minister, they are going to lose a lot of good people. You are forcing them to pay for this move. This is more than $40 million out of research, not going to research, but going to an office move and redundancies, Minister. Please, how is this a good idea? Decentralisation in principle is a good thing. It can work. It rarely does, but it can. But it only works when there's a plan, Minister. There's a strategic plan, well thought out, and we have consultation with those who are going to be affected. You've done none of that, Minister. You have done none of that. This is no more than a thought bubble on your part. I like to think it's not pork barrelling in your electorate. That's for you to explain. But it's a bad idea, Minister. you should rethink it, and you should listen to what the APVMA people and those who run our world's best RDCs are saying to you.
I thank the member